You think you can just walk away from this family after everything we've built. Your brother's slush fund was never your concern, and those phone logs will stay buried if you know what's good for you. If the business partners find out about the transfer, the mountain retreat, and the entire legacy will be gone, and you'll have no one to blame but yourself. Hi, my name is Lauren Bennett. I am 30 years old. I hung up without answering. The line went dead, but the words stayed. My mother had called from the mountain retreat, her voice tight and clipped the way it got. When she was protecting something she refused to name, I sat at my kitchen table in the city staring at the blank screen of my phone. The call had lasted less than 2 minutes, but it had already changed the math of everything. I had not gone looking for trouble. I had been reviewing the quarterly statements for the family investment account because my name was still on one of the older documents from when I turned 21. A routine check, that was all. The numbers did not line up. Transfers had moved through a private account tied to my brother Michael's name, then disappeared into a holding structure I had never seen before. The amounts were not small. They were the kind that required signatures and explanations. No explanations had been offered to me. I printed the phone logs the night before the call. They showed repeated calls between my mother, my Aunt Diane, and the private bank that handled the slush fund. The timestamps lined up with the transfer dates. Nothing dramatic on the surface, just patterns. Patterns my mother clearly wanted erased. I drove to the retreat the next morning because staying in the city would have felt like waiting for the next call. The retreat sat high in the Colorado mountains, a glass and wood structure built to look like it had always belonged there. My father had bought the land years ago. After he passed, my mother and aunt had taken over the management. Michael handled the numbers when he bothered to show up. I had stayed out of it on purpose. I preferred my own work as a financial analyst at a firm that did not share blood with me. The drive took 4 hours. I used the time to rehearse what I would say if anyone asked why I had come. I did not rehearse what I would do if they already knew I had the logs. When I arrived, the main room was empty. The fire was lit even though it was only September. My mother stood near the window, a glass of something clear in her hand. She did not turn when I walked in. "You came anyway," she said. I set my bag on the bench by the door. I wanted to see the statements in person. She laughed once short and without warmth. "There are no statements for you to see. Everything is already handled." My Aunt Diane came down the stairs then carrying a folder. She stopped when she saw me. Her expression did not change, but her grip on the folder tightened. "Lauren," she said, "we didn't expect you until the weekend. I changed my mind." The folder in her hand was the same color as the one I had at home. I could see the edge of a printed page sticking out. Phone logs. The same ones I had printed. My mother finally turned. "You need to leave the logs alone. Michael knows what he's doing with that account. The partners do not need to hear about internal transfers." I kept my voice even. Internal transfers usually stay on the books. These did not. Diane stepped closer. "Some things are better left as family business. You have always been good at staying out of family business. Keep doing that." The words were calm. The edge underneath was not. I felt the shift in the room the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. They were not asking. They were telling me the boundary had already been drawn and I was standing on the wrong side of it. I did not answer. I walked past them toward the small office at the back of the main floor. The door was unlocked. Inside, the desk was clear except for a single envelope. I opened it. Inside were the account statements I had asked for. They showed the transfers out of Michael's slush fund, then into a separate entity I did not recognize. The dates matched the phone calls. I took photos with my phone. I did not take the papers. I closed the envelope and put it back exactly where I had found it. When I came out, my mother and aunt were still in the main room. They watched me but did not speak. I picked up my bag. "I'll be at the cabin down the road," I said, "if you want to talk without the folder in your hand." I left before either of them could answer. That night, I sat on the narrow porch of the rental cabin and looked at the photos on my phone. The numbers were clear. The phone logs were clear. What was not clear was how far my mother and aunt were willing to go to keep the partners from seeing any of it, and how far I was willing to go to decide whether any of it was still my problem. I had spent years keeping my distance from the retreat and the accounts. I had built a life that did not require their approval or their money. But the call had made something obvious. They were not protecting the family. They were protecting the version of the family that kept the money moving without questions, the version that did not include me asking those questions. I did not sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the folder in Diane's hand and the way my mother had not looked surprised to see me. They had expected me to come. They had already decided what they would say if I did. The next morning, I drove back to the city. I did not tell them I was leaving. I did not tell them I had the photos. I simply drove. Halfway down the mountain, my phone rang. It was my mother again. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short. Lauren, come back. We can fix this before the partners arrive next week. Do not make this bigger than it has to be. I did not call back. I reached my apartment that evening and sat at the same kitchen table where I had taken the first call. The photos were still on my phone. The phone logs were still printed and sitting in a drawer. I had not shown them to anyone. I had not decided what came next. But I knew one thing with complete clarity. The version of the family my mother and aunt were protecting did not have room for me asking questions. And I was no longer willing to pretend that silence was the same thing as peace. How far is too far when the people who raised you start treating the truth like a liability instead of a fact? I kept asking myself that question while I stared at the photos. I still do not have an answer I like. I put the phone down after the voicemail ended. The suggestion that I could still fix this before the partners arrived next week felt less like an offer and less like a threat dressed up as concern. I had the photos of the statements on my phone and the printed phone logs in a drawer. Neither felt like leverage yet. They felt like proof that the version of the family I had kept at arm's length had been running without me for a long time. The next morning, I went into the office early. My desk sat in a quiet corner of the financial analysis floor, away from the main noise. I pulled up the old family investment files I still had access to through a shared portal that had never been revoked. The transfers showed up again clean on the surface, but the destination account was new. I copied the details into a separate folder and sent a single encrypted message to Sarah Klein. Sarah worked 2 floors up in forensic accounting. We had worked together on 3 client audits last year. She answered within the hour and suggested we meet in the small conference room on the 8th floor that no one used after 10. I took the stairs instead of the elevator. She closed the door behind us and set her laptop on the table. Show me what you have. I handed her the phone with the photos. She scrolled without speaking for several minutes. Then she pulled the printed logs from the envelope I had brought and laid them next to her screen. These timestamps matched the wire dates exactly, she said. Her voice stayed flat professional. The slush fund account belongs to your brother on paper, but the authorization codes are cycling through 2 other logins. One looks like it belongs to your mother. The second is unregistered in the system I can see from here. She typed for another minute. The money left the slush fund in 3 separate movements over 6 weeks. Total, just over $150,000. It landed in a holding company that lists a mountain property as its primary asset. That holding company then paid out to a personal account I cannot trace without a subpoena. I kept my hands still on the table. Can you tell where the personal account goes? Not without more access. But the pattern is not investment rebalancing. It looks like coverage. Someone was moving money to keep a balance sheet from showing a shortfall. My phone vibrated on the table. The screen showed an unknown number with a Colorado area code. I let it ring once, then answered on speaker. Lauren Bennett. The voice belonged to Thomas Reed, one of the 3 outside partners who had bought into the retreat's operating company 2 years earlier. I had met him once at a closing dinner. He sounded tired. Thomas, what can I do for you? I'm calling because your mother listed you as a secondary contact on the original operating agreement. We have an auditor asking questions about recent movements out of the family accounts. She said you might have the most recent statements. Do you? Sarah looked at me across the table. I kept my tone even. I have copies of older statements. Nothing current. When is the auditor asking? Tomorrow morning. Your mother told us the transfers were internal and already reconciled. I wanted to check before we sit down with them. I'll see what I have and get back to you by end of day. He paused. Appreciate it. And Lauren, if this turns into something the firm has to disclose to the bank, the partners will need to know who authorized the movements. Your name is still on the signature card from the original setup. The call ended. Sarah closed her laptop. That was not a casual check in. He is already assuming someone inside the family moved the money without telling the partners. I stood up. I need to go back to the retreat tonight. You sure that is the smart move? No, but staying here while they control the narrative is worse. She slid a business card across the table. If you find anything else that looks like it needs a second set of eyes, send it to the personal email on the back. Do not use the company system. I took the card. Thank you. She did not smile. Just be careful whose side they decide you are on when the questions start. I drove back to the mountains that afternoon. The road felt longer than it had the day before. When I reached the retreat, the main lights were already on, even though it was barely dusk. My mother's car sat in the driveway next to my Aunt Diane's. Michael's truck was parked farther down the gravel, as if he had arrived, and then decided not to come inside. I knocked once and walked in. My mother stood in the kitchen with a glass in her hand. Diane sat at the island with a stack of folders in front of her. Michael leaned against the far counter, arms crossed. You came back, my mother said. The words carried the same flat edge as the voicemail. I spoke with Thomas Reed this morning. Diane's hands tightened on the folders. Michael looked at the floor. My mother set her glass down. Thomas should not have called you. This is family business. He called because your name is still on the operating agreement as a contact. He thinks I have the current statements. I told him I would check. Diane spoke without looking up. You should have told him you do not get involved in the accounts. That has always been the arrangement. I pulled the printed phone logs from my bag and set them on the island. The arrangement changed when the logs started matching the wire dates. 3 movements, $150,000, all routed through Michael's account and then into the holding company that owns this property. Michael finally looked at me. His face was tired in a way I had not seen before. I signed the authorizations. Mom and Diane needed the coverage for a shortfall on the operating loan. The partners were not supposed to see the dip. My mother stepped closer to the island. You are making this sound like theft. It was a temporary bridge. The money is already moving back through normal channels. The auditor arrives tomorrow, I said. Thomas Reed already asked me for the statements. If I hand him what I have, the questions will not stop at the transfers. They will want to know why the authorization codes were cycling through logins that do not belong to Michael. Diane closed the top folder. Then do not hand him anything. Tell him the family handles its own reconciliations and that you were mistaken about having current copies. We can manage the auditor. My mother's voice dropped. You have always been good at staying out of things that do not concern you, Lauren. This is one of those times. Walk away now and we will handle the rest. Keep pushing and the partners will decide the entire family is a liability, including you. I left the logs on the island and walked toward the back office. No one followed me. The envelope I had seen on the previous visit was gone. In its place sat a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note in my mother's writing. Do not make us choose between the business and you. I took a photo of the note. Then I walked out the front door without saying goodbye. Michael's truck was still in the driveway. He stood beside it now, keys in his hand. They are not going to stop, he said quietly. The shortfall was bigger than they told me. Diane pushed the transfers because she thought the partners would never notice. Mom went along because she did not want the retreat to show a loss on paper. I stopped at my car. Why are you telling me this now? Because when the auditor asks tomorrow, my name is the one on the account. If they decide it was fraud, I am the one they will look at first. I need to know if you are going to hand them the logs. I opened my car door. I have not decided yet. He nodded once. Then decide fast. Thomas Reed already called me after he spoke with you. He wants a meeting before the auditor arrives. He said if the family cannot produce clean numbers by morning, the partners will vote to freeze the operating account until everything is reviewed. I got into the car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I watched Michael walk back toward the house. The lights in the main room stayed on. No one came to the window. My phone rang before I reached the bottom of the driveway. It was Sarah Klein. I ran the holding company name through a public record search, she said. It was created 18 months ago. The registered agent is your Aunt Diane. The only asset listed is the mountain property, but the bank statements attached to the formation documents show an initial deposit of $200,000 that does not match any transfer from the family accounts I can see. I pulled onto the main road. Where did that money come from? I cannot tell from public records, but the timing lines up with a large withdrawal from a different account your mother controls. If the auditor pulls the full chain tomorrow, they will see it. I thanked her and ended the call. The road ahead was dark except for the headlights. I had the photos, the logs, and now the knowledge that the initial funding of the holding company had come from somewhere my mother had not disclosed. The partners were already choosing sides. Thomas Reed had called me first, then Michael. By morning, they would have to decide whether the family could still be trusted with the operating account. My mother and Diane had bet that silence would hold. The bet was failing. I drove toward the cabin I had rented the night before. Halfway there, my phone lit up again with another Colorado number. This time, it was not Thomas Reed. It was the main line for the retreat. I let it ring until the call went to voicemail. The message was short and spoken by my mother. Lauren, the partners, just scheduled an emergency call for 7 a.m. They want all authorized signers on the line. That includes you. If you do not join, they will assume you are refusing to cooperate. Call me back before midnight so we can decide what you are going to say. The message ended. I pulled into the cabin driveway and turned off the engine. The only sound was the cooling tick of the car and the faint wind moving through the trees. I had until midnight to decide whether to join the call, what version of the truth to offer, and whether the price of staying silent had already become higher than the price of speaking. The partners were no longer waiting for the family to sort itself out. They were forcing the question into the open. I sat in the dark car for a long time before I reached for my phone again. The voicemail from my mother sat on my phone like a deadline I had not agreed to. I played it once more in the dark car, then deleted it without replying. I had until 7 the next morning to decide what version of the truth I would offer on the call with the partners. I drove the rest of the way to the cabin and sat on the narrow porch until the cold forced me inside. Sleep did not come. I kept seeing the handwritten note on the desk and the way Michael had looked at the floor when he admitted the shortfall was larger than anyone had said. At 6:45, I logged into the video call from the cabin table. The screen showed Thomas Reed, another partner I did not know by name, and a man in a dark suit, identified only as Marcus Hale from compliance. My mother and Diane appeared in a split screen from the main room at the retreat. Michael was absent. Thomas spoke first. Lauren, thank you for joining. Marcus has been reviewing the recent movements out of the family accounts tied to the operating agreement. We need clarity on the authorizations before we speak with the bank this afternoon. Marcus Hale adjusted his camera. The holding company that received the transfers lists your aunt as the registered agent. The initial funding deposit of $200,000 does not trace back to any documented family investment. We are required to flag this for further review. My mother leaned forward. Her voice stayed calm but carried the same edge from every call. This is an internal family reconciliation. Lauren has not been involved in the day-to-day management for years. She is here because her name remains on an old signature card. She can confirm she has no current knowledge of the operating decisions. Diane added, we have already moved to correct the temporary shortfall. The partners do not need to concern themselves with family bookkeeping. I kept my camera on and my expression neutral. I will not confirm anything that is not accurate. The phone logs show the authorization codes cycling through logins belonging to my mother and my aunt. The transfers totaled $150,000 over 6 weeks. The holding company that received the funds was created 18 months ago and lists only the mountain property as its asset. Thomas Reed's face did not change. Marcus Hale made a note on a pad in front of him. Miss Bennett, are you prepared to provide the original statements and logs to compliance by end of business today. Before I could answer, my mother spoke again. Lauren, you are choosing to make this public when it could have stayed inside the family. Smart people know when protecting the business matters more than being right about numbers on a page. The words landed exactly as she intended. They were not a question. They were a reminder that I had always been the one who could be counted on to stay quiet. I looked directly at the camera. I will send the logs and the photos I took of the statements. I will not sign any document that states the transfers were properly authorized or reconciled. That is the only statement I am willing to make. Diane's expression tightened. My mother sat back in her chair. Thomas Reed nodded once. We will proceed with the review. The operating account will be frozen until compliance clears the chain of transfers. All authorized signers will receive formal notice by end of day. The call ended. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet cabin until the sun cleared the ridge. Then I drove back to the retreat one last time. My mother and Diane were still in the main room. Elena Vargas, the woman who managed the property maintenance, stood near the kitchen with a clipboard in her hand. She had worked at the retreat since before my father died. She glanced at me when I walked in, then looked down at her clipboard. My mother did not waste time. You just cost the family the ability to move money without every partner watching. I hope whatever point you were trying to make was worth it. I set the envelope with the printed logs on the island. The point was never to make something public. The point was to stop pretending the transfers did not happen. Diane picked up the envelope without opening it. You could have called us first. Instead, you went to your colleague and then to the partners. That is not how family handles problems. Elena Vargas spoke from the kitchen without looking up. The auditor's car just turned onto the property road. He will be here in 5 minutes. My mother's shoulders dropped a fraction. She turned to me. If you stay for this meeting, you will be asked to explain why your name stayed on the signature card after you walked away from every other part of the business. Are you prepared for that? I shook my head. I am not staying for the meeting. I came to say this once. I will not lie for the transfers. I will not sign anything that claims they were internal and reconciled. And I will not be listed as a contact or signer on any document going forward. My mother's voice dropped into something colder. You think walking away now protects you. It does not. When the review is finished, the partners will decide whether the family can still be trusted with any control. If they remove us, the holding company and the property become theirs to restructure. You will have nothing left to claim and no reason to come back here. I met her eyes. That is already true. I have not claimed anything from this place in years. I am only here because you called me about the logs. I am leaving because I am done answering those calls. Diane set the envelope down. You are choosing isolation over the only people who have ever known your full name on every document. Do not expect us to explain your absence when the partners ask. I turned to Elena Vargas. If they ask you anything about the statements or the transfers, tell them the truth as you know it. Do not protect anyone's version. She nodded once, small and quick. I will answer what is asked. I walked out without waiting for a response. My mother did not follow. Diane stayed at the island. The auditor's car passed mine on the gravel road as I drove away. I did not look back. By the time I reached the city, the formal notice had already arrived in my email. The operating account was frozen. All signers, including me, were removed, pending the compliance review. The holding company that owned the mountain property would be restructured under partner oversight. The initial $200,000 deposit would be traced through the bank. No charges were mentioned. No one was named as responsible beyond the need for full documentation. I forwarded the notice to Sarah Klein with a single line, "The review is moving forward without me. Thank you for the second set of eyes." She replied an hour later. If you need a professional reference for anything outside the family accounts, let me know. Some things are cleaner when they stay separate. I did not answer. I deleted the thread after reading it. 3 weeks later, the bank completed its review. The partners voted to keep the operating company intact, but placed the mountain property and the holding company under a new management structure that reported directly to them. The family's direct control ended. My mother and Diane received formal letters stating they were no longer authorized to move funds without partner approval. Michael's slush fund account was closed, and the remaining balance applied to the operating shortfall. No one called to tell me the outcome. I read it in the quarterly statement that arrived in my personal email because my name had not yet been fully removed from the distribution list. I printed the statement, read it once, and filed it with the other documents I no longer needed. Then I sent a single certified letter to the address on file for the operating company. It stated that I was voluntarily removing myself from any remaining signature authority contact lists or future correspondence. I included a copy of my driver's license for verification and asked that my name be deleted from all records within 30 days. No one responded. The next quarterly statement arrived without my name on it. I kept working at the same firm. Sarah Klein and I passed each other in the hallway and exchanged the same professional nods we had always used. We never discussed the family accounts again. I did not seek out new people to replace the ones I had stepped away from. I did not need the silence filled. The quiet that followed the letter felt different from the quiet I had maintained for years, while the transfers happened without me. This quiet belonged to me. Sometimes I still receive mail addressed to the old signature card. I return it unopened. The retreat appears in occasional real estate listings under the new management structure. I do not check the photos. My mother and Diane have not called. Michael sent one text 2 months after the review closed. It said only that the property was stable and that he had taken a job with one of the partner's other companies. I did not reply. I live in the same apartment. I keep the same hours. The difference is small and private. When the phone rings from an unknown number, I let it go to voicemail without the old calculation of whether it might be family. When it is not family, I delete the message without listening. The cost of that boundary is the absence of any remaining thread. There is no dramatic break or final argument. There is only the letter I sent and the absence that followed. I do not miss the version of the family that required me to stay quiet about numbers that did not add up. I also do not pretend the absence feels like victory. It feels like the only workable distance I could create once the partners forced the question into the open. The mountain property still stands under new management. The accounts have been cleaned to the satisfaction of compliance. The people who raised me continue their lives without my name attached to any of it. I chose the distance. They did not fight to keep me inside it. That is the shape the end took. I live with the quiet it left and the knowledge that I will not be called again to explain or to stay silent. The freedom is real. It is also smaller and colder than any story I told myself while I was still deciding whether to send the logs. Thank you for listening to my story. How far would you go before you realized the cost of staying silent was higher than the cost of walking away alone?